Well, unless you have been under a rock today, you saw what happened in the market. Thought that in light of the end of the U.S. economy, I'm here at my son's golf practice. I thought I'd jump on and give a real quick kind of update about where we're at, what you should do. Now, I titled this The End of the U.S. Economy, not because I really think the economy is going to end, but because a lot of people, every time this happens, a lot of people begin to instantly act like this is it, it's all over with, we need to just kind of give up and move on. But reality, these are things that happen quite often and should have really been no surprise to anybody. If you've been watching what's been going on in the markets and the economies, you should have seen something like this coming. It's not hard to see it coming. It is really hard, on the contrary, though, to determine when it will arrive. It's often not hard to know that the economy is about to take off or the economy is about to slow down, but it's really difficult to know, is now the time? Like, is now the time that the economy slows down, or is now the time the economy picks up? That's the hard part. But if you think back a couple months back, probably about 2 months ago, I did a video about what would it take to see interest rates come back down. And it was talking a lot about housing costs. And one of the things I said is, for the Fed to really desire to lower interest rates, we needed to see unemployment hit about 4.3%. Last Wednesday was the day the Fed met. And what they said during their Fed meeting was that they were not going to lower interest rates at that meeting, but they were open to the idea of opening interest rates in the next meeting. Now, typically, when the Fed has said these things and they've said, we're not ready to lower rates, but when time is right, we will, and that time is almost here, it's coming, we're going to be ready to adjust, or they've given any glimmer of hope to the markets that interest rates will be coming back down, that drove the markets up. Now, the reason they're saying we're ready to lower interest rates in the future isn't because that's good news for the markets. It's actually bad news. It means they're willing to lower interest rates because we're going into a recession, not because they just have reached their goal and they're now ready to lower rates. On the contrary, if they reach their goal of slowing down inflation to where we hit a continual 2% average inflation rate, they don't have a reason to lower rates, because they've hit their goals. They want to actually, at that point, maintain, and maintaining rates would be the right thing to do. But what they're talking about last week is the fact that the chances of a rate cut in September have increased, because they're starting to see some things going on in the economy that would lead them to want to have an increase. They would lead them to want to decrease the average overnight interest rate. So if they're going to decrease that interest rate, the markets have typically seen that as a good sign. All right, good. Cheap money's coming back, and the markets had been taking off. But something strange happened. And when the Fed Reserve actually gave bad news, stating that the economy is getting worse and we might lower interest rates, the stock markets took that bad news as bad news. Over the past year or so, every time they've heard bad news, they've taken it as good news. And it's really been really interesting in that fact, in that anytime inflation went down, which is good news, but the reason it was good news to the market was because inflation coming down meant rate increases were closer to being back on the table. Sorry, not rate increases. Rate decreases were closer to being back on the table. So that one made sense. But every time we saw anything bad in the news, an increase to unemployment, for example, the stock market went up. So if the stock market's going up because unemployment is going up, that's a little backwards, right? People are going to have less money to spend. So why would the stock market respond positively to this? Well, the stock market was responding positively to increases in unemployment because that increased the likelihood of a future rate cut, which is what the stock market wanted. So now what happened? Well, what happened is it changed. We got to that 4.3 number for unemployment. And with unemployment at 4.3, this isn't a number I've come up with. This is a number that's been thrown around by other people, and I've just kind of listened to it and kind of caught on to it. Well, at 4.3 for unemployment, the Fed now has a reason to say we're going to cut rates. So when the Fed threatens, or I shouldn't say threatens, but gives the insight that coming in September we're willing to cut rates, and they have a data point that says they're actually potentially there and showing that the economy is slowing down enough, this tells people to think that maybe, just maybe, the rate cut is coming. But the reason the rate cut is coming is something we don't want. So it raises the question. If rate cuts are probably coming, the economy is turning down. We've seen, depending on what index you're looking at, we've seen drops of, Japan fell 12% at one point. I don't remember where it closed off. US market closed down around 3 today in different places. But over the past week, we've seen things like Microsoft, which is what was in the 440 range, now down to 399. This is a pretty sizable drop. This is over 10% for Microsoft to drop. So depending on what you're looking at, we have distinctly sectors of the market that are in what we call that are officially in a pullback, or what we call a correction. And if they get to that 20% drop, then they're officially in a bear market. So what do we do as we go forward? Well, the first thing we do is we handle it differently depending on where you're at in your investing life. If you're in your 20s or your 30s, you jump up and down, you celebrate, you work hard so you don't lose your job, because that's the biggest concern right now, would be losing your job. But you work hard, you put your nose to the grindstone, you make yourself irreplaceable at work. But you jump up and down because these lower stock prices, think about it. What happened to make Microsoft worth 10% less than it was this time last week or 2 weeks ago? Nothing. It's still worth the same, and its future projections are the same. But no one wants it right now because they're fearful for where the economy is going. So you, someone who maybe has some money that you're not going to need for the next 20 years, even 5 years, you can put it in and you can feel pretty secure that the money is going to be there when it's time for you to take it out. So if you're in your early years and you've still got, say, 10 or more years till retirement, you don't want to do anything except continue to invest. You want to take every free penny you have, especially as the market continues to go down, and you want to put more money into it. You want to realize that while people are making the mistake of selling for no reason, selling for short-term fears, you want to make the decision to buy for long-term greed. Buy for long-term greed when people are selling for short-term fears. This is my version of the Warren Buffett phrase of be greedy when people are fearful and fearful when people are greedy. Recognizing how long you have to invest is really, really important. Now, if you're not at that point and you have less than 10 years or less than 5 years till retirement, there's a couple things to think about and to do. Maybe what you do is you just keep the money where it's at, but you change your new 401k allocation so that maybe they're going into something a little more steady, and you can kind of offset some of the risk in that way. But really the advantage fall to people on the higher end of the age range, we'll say, the higher end of your working years, those who are closer to or entering into retirement. The advantage is, depending on where you're at income-wise, it's a really good year to do some tax strategy planning. If we see the market go down another 10% and get into that bear market area, then what you can do is you can think of is you generally have 3 buckets of taxes. The first bucket is your tax deferred. That's your traditional 401k. You're going to pay taxes off in the future. Then you have your tax free. That's your Roth IRAs. You've paid taxes on them today, and you're not going to pay taxes on them anymore. And then you've got your third bucket, which are your taxable dollars. Those are the ones that when you sell them, you'll pay capital gains tax. So let's address each of those 3 buckets. First, the easiest, which is that middle bucket, the tax-free money that's in your Roth. Don't do anything with it. It is already in the most tax-advantaged place you can have it. There's nothing you can do with it. Just leave it. So now, second one is the traditional IRA money, that money that is deferred, and you're going to pay taxes in the future. One of the things that you want to do is you want to look for opportunities to get as much of that tax-deferred money out without increasing your taxes. And specifically, if you can get that tax deferred money out, move it into that tax-free bucket in years where the market is down. Let me give you this example, just generic numbers here. If you got $100,000 in tax deferred money and you decide you want to move it all over to a Roth IRA, you're going to have to pull out $100,000 and pay tax on $100,000. On the contrary, if we see a market drop of 20% and we go from 100,000 to 80,000, then you can pull all that money out and move it into the tax-free bucket and only pay taxes on $80,000. That's a real advantage. So if we do continue to see these market drops, you'll want to take advantage of those Roth IRA conversions if you're in a tax bracket where it makes sense to do that this year. it really gives you an advantage of creating some tax strategy that is so much more valuable than picking the right stock over the long run. Tax strategy and tax planning will save you a ton of money. All right, now let's look at the third bucket of money, that taxable accounts, the ones where you pay capital gains and you pay dividends. So the question is, what do we do on those accounts if we see a market drop? Well, those are actually really good accounts to sell. And the reason you can sell those is because, we'll use the example earlier of Microsoft. Maybe you like Microsoft. And you say to yourself, I really like Microsoft. And I think even though it's down somewhere around 10% right now, I think it's going to continue to go up over the next 10 years. So maybe I'm up 30 or 40%. Well, what I can do is I can sell Microsoft this year, realize some of those gains, then in 30 days buy Microsoft back, and then let it run up again, hopefully, over the next 10 years. So what you've done is you've allowed yourself to recognize some gains early as opposed to letting them continue to grow. Now, you may not want to do this because if you're in a year where your tax rate is too high anyway, then it's not a good idea. But if you're in a year where you think your tax rate is going to be lower, especially your capital gains tax rate, lower now than in the future, go ahead and do it. And it can be very valuable for you. If you are a lower income person, you can actually, and you have losses, so if the market continues to go down and you end up with losses, it's actually a really good idea to sell those things and capitalize some of your short-term losses in those years, because it becomes valuable and opportunity to do that. You can also, and this is all just what's called tax loss harvesting. You can also look at some things that you have gains on and some things you have losses on. So maybe you still have a lot of gains in Microsoft, but maybe you got into Nvidia late and you took the crash in Nvidia. Well, you can sell them both and let the gains on one offset the losses on one offset the gains on the other, so that you don't pay taxes. Really, in a market downturn, there's a lot of potential out there and a lot of things you can do that will allow you to earn a little tax savings, so to speak. But really, the best thing you can do during a downturn is buy. Stocks are the only thing that when they go on sale, we don't buy. They're the only thing. I've never heard of anything else where someone's like, I would have bought that couch, but it's only $800 a day and it was $1,000 yesterday. It's the only thing out there. So if you have the opportunity, if you're sitting on cash, I have one client in particular. I love the guy. He's brilliant, super smart, but he's sitting on a bunch of cash. And he's just been sitting there for a long time, and he's probably missed out on 20 to 30% run up in the market on this cash because he doesn't want to pay mutual fund fees, and it's in his 401k, and the only options are mutual funds. Well, because he didn't want to pay maybe $500 for his $100,000 in his 401k, he's lost maybe 20 or 30. This creates a really good opportunity to say, the market's down 10%, maybe it'll be down 20% in a couple weeks. You might have been saved. Let's go ahead and get in. If you've been sitting on cash waiting for a time to buy, this is the time to buy. It might still go down, but no one knows. So don't sit on cash any longer. So hopefully that in the midst of this turmoil and the end of the world, hopefully you will enjoy learning a little bit about what to do when we do see a stock market turn down. Maybe I'll get a little more analytical, a little more technical tomorrow, but like I said, just kind of hanging out at the golf course while my son practices. He's on the high school golf team, so I thought this was a good time to just put together a real short 15 minutes. It wasn't that short, but just a real quick statement. Keep hanging in there.